3 men in tactical gear pounded on my front door yelling, "Police, open up right now!" I was in the backyard flipping burgers when my security cameras started recording. Vests, weapons, fake patrol decals slapped on a black SUV in my driveway. They shouted about warrants, obstruction, immediate entry. My crime? Flying an American flag and growing vegetables that my HOA president didn't like. Through the window, I watched them spread out like they'd done this before. But something felt off. The way they moved, the way they avoided the camera, the way their badges didn't reflect light correctly. That's when I heard the rumble of a familiar engine pulling into our driveway, and my wife stepped out of her federal vehicle. No shouting, no panic, just a calm hand reaching into her jacket, and a badge that made every single one of them freeze mid-step. What they thought was a simple HOA intimidation job had just crossed straight into federal jurisdiction. Stay with me, because what happened next ended an entire HOA presidency. My name's Marcus Dakota, and 3 months ago, I thought I'd found paradise. After 24 years coordinating logistics for the Army, I was ready for quiet retirement. My wife Delilah and I bought a corner lot in Millbrook Estates, a neat subdivision about 30 minutes outside Denver, perfect for a guy who just wanted to work in his garage workshop and tend a small vegetable garden. The morning coffee brewing in our kitchen smelled like freedom those first few weeks. I'd listen to Delilah's duty boots clicking across our hardwood floors as she got ready for work. 15 years as a U.S. Marshal specializing in white-collar fugitive recovery. She'd kiss me goodbye, and I'd head out to work on my raised garden beds or plain wood in the garage. The scent of pine shavings and the weathered texture of fence posts I was installing myself made everything feel right. Then I met Vivian Blackwood at Vivian. Picture a woman in her late 50s who treats a homeowners association like her personal kingdom. Real estate background, drives a white BMW X5 with vanity plates reading HOA boss. I'm not kidding. She showed up on my third Tuesday, clipboard in hand, wearing the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes. "Mr. Dakota," she said, scanning my property like a general inspecting troops. "I'm afraid we need to discuss some compliance issues." Those raised garden beds I'd built? Apparently they were unauthorized structures that violated the HOA's aesthetic standards. Never mind that they met every city building code. Never mind that they were cleaner and more organized than half the lawns in the neighborhood. Vivian handed me a violation notice for $500. "This escalates to a lien if not resolved in 30 days, she said, still wearing that plastic smile. I thanked her politely and went inside to read the HOA covenants, twice. Then I called 3 neighbors to ask about their garden setups. That's when I started noticing the pattern. The Johnsons down the street, he's retired Air Force, got cited for an excessive patriotic display. Their crime? A regulation-sized American flag on a standard pole. The Garcias, who'd moved in from California, faced constant nitpicking about their front yard landscaping, despite maintaining it better than most. Meanwhile, Vivian's cronies could park boats in their driveways and let their grass grow knee-high without a word. See, I'd dealt with enough bureaucratic nonsense in the military to recognize a power trip when I saw one. But this felt personal, targeted. Like Vivian had decided certain neighbors just didn't belong in her vision of property values. "Honey," Delilah said that evening, reading the violation notice while I explained my theory. "You know what this smells like to me? Selective enforcement. I've seen it before with corrupt officials." "What do you mean?" She set down the notice and looked at me with those sharp eyes that had tracked down federal fugitives across 3 states. "I mean, people who abuse small amounts of power often have bigger secrets to hide. They use harassment to distract from their own problems." I filed a formal dispute the next morning, requesting all HOA meeting minutes from the past 2 years. Standard procedure, according to Colorado state law. I also started documenting every interaction with Vivian, every phone call, every piece of mail. Her response came 3 days later. Not just denying my dispute, that I expected, but her letter included a veiled threat about property inspections, and mentioned she had contacts in law enforcement. The paper still smelled like fresh ink from her printer when I read those words twice to make sure I wasn't imagining things. That's when I realized this wasn't going to be a simple neighborhood dispute. Vivian Blackwood thought she could intimidate a retired Army logistics coordinator and the wife of a federal marshal. She had no idea what she was walking into. Vivian's response to my dispute was swift and predictable. Instead of addressing my concerns about the garden beds, she doubled down. A second violation notice arrived in my mailbox on Friday morning, this time for excessive patriotic displays. My crime? That regulation American flag I mentioned. 3 by 5 feet, mounted on a standard 6-foot pole, exactly like thousands of other homes across America. But according to Vivian's new interpretation of HOA rules, it was visually disruptive to neighborhood harmony. The crackle of papers being shuffled filled our kitchen as I spread out the original HOA covenants, the state flag protection statutes, and Vivian's increasingly creative violation notices. The smell of fresh ink from my printer mixed with Delilah's morning coffee as I printed out Colorado Revised Statute 38 to 33.3106, which specifically protects homeowners' rights to display the American flag. "Marcus," Delilah said, reading over my shoulder, "this woman's either completely ignorant of state law or she's banking on you being too intimidated to fight back." I'd learned something important during my military career. When dealing with bullies, documentation is your best weapon. So I filed another formal dispute, this time including a copy of the state flag protection law. I requested detailed meeting minutes showing when the HOA board had voted to restrict flag displays. I even included photographs of 17 other flags in our neighborhood that Vivian had mysteriously overlooked. But I also did something else. I started researching Vivian Blackwood herself. Public records showed she'd been HOA president for 6 years. Real estate license active, though her sales volume had dropped significantly over the past 3 years. Married to Roland Blackwood, who worked for the county assessor's office, which explained some things about her confidence in throwing around threats about property inspections. The response to my second dispute arrived via certified mail. Vivian had scheduled an emergency board meeting to discuss what she called the Dakota property violations. The meeting was set for the following Thursday at 7 p.m. Here's the kicker. They never notified me about this meeting. I only found out because Mrs. Patterson, my neighbor to the east, mentioned it while I was working in the garden. "She came by yesterday asking if I'd had any problems with noise or disruption from your property," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice carrying that careful tone people use when they're trying to warn you about something. "I told her you've been the best neighbor we've had in years." And that's when I understood Vivian's strategy. She wasn't just targeting me with violations, she was trying to build a case that I was somehow a problem for the entire neighborhood. Divide and conquer. Make me look like the unreasonable one. But she'd made a crucial mistake. See, I'd spent 2 decades coordinating complex logistics under pressure. Patience and planning were my specialties. So instead of storming into that board meeting demanding answers, I did my homework. I spent Tuesday afternoon at the county clerk's office pulling HOA financial records. Public information, available to any homeowner who asks. What I found was interesting. Over the past 3 years, the HOA had paid out almost $15,000 to something called Millbrook Property Management Solutions for compliance consulting services. Funny thing was, I couldn't find any business license for Millbrook Property Management Solutions in Colorado's state database. Wednesday evening, I got my first real break. An anonymous note tucked under my truck's windshield wiper. Simple white paper, block letters, "Some neighbors don't belong here." Now, a different person might have seen this as intimidation, but to me, it looked like evidence. Evidence that someone was escalating beyond official HOA channels into personal harassment. I photographed that note front and back, noting the time and location where I'd found it. Then I drove to the local office supply store and bought a small security camera designed for monitoring packages. 15 minutes of installation and my front porch was under discreet surveillance. Thursday's board meeting happened without me, just as Vivian had planned. But Friday morning brought an interesting development. Mrs. Patterson knocked on my door with a manila envelope. "I thought you should know what happened at that meeting," she said, glancing around nervously before handing me the envelope. "Vivian's got it out for you, honey. But some of us think she's gone too far." Inside was a handwritten summary of the board meeting. 4 members present, all voting to uphold my violations and add a new one. Failure to maintain community standards regarding landscaping aesthetics. They'd also voted to authorize enhanced compliance monitoring of my property. But here's what Vivian didn't know. Her threats about having contacts in law enforcement were about to become her biggest mistake, because my wife's federal badge trumped any local connections she might have. The real question was how far Vivian was willing to push this before she learned exactly who she was messing with. Monday morning brought Vivian's next escalation. A professional-looking man in a polo shirt and khakis knocked on my door at 8 a.m. sharp, clipboard in hand, introducing himself as Dave Morrison from Millbrook Property Management Solutions. "I'm here to conduct the compliance inspection authorized by your HOA board," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I need to examine your rear yard structures and measure setback distances. Remember that mysterious company I couldn't find in the state business database? Here was their representative claiming authority to inspect my property based on HOA violations I was actively disputing. "Let me see your credentials," I said. Dave shuffled through his clipboard papers. I worked directly with Mrs. Blackwood on compliance issues. This inspection was voted on by the board. That's not what I asked. Show me your business license, insurance certificate, and the specific HOA covenant that authorizes third-party inspections. His confidence cracked. I'll need to check with Mrs. Blackwood about those documents. After Dave left, I spent the afternoon doing what I do best, research. A reverse phone lookup on the number Dave had given me traced back to Mile High Security Services, a private security company that provided what their website called property protection and enforcement services. So Vivian wasn't hiring property management consultants. She was hiring security contractors and billing the HOA for it. That evening, I sat down with Colorado's HOA disclosure laws. Under state statute 38 to 33.321, any homeowner can request detailed financial records from their association, including vendor contracts and payment authorizations. The musty smell of old legal documents filled my home office as I drafted a formal records request. I asked for 3 years of vendor contracts, payment authorizations, and board meeting minutes discussing expenditures over $500. I also requested copies of all business licenses and insurance certificates for vendors receiving HOA funds. Vivian's response came via her lawyer, the first sign that I was onto something significant. The letter claimed my request was overly broad and burdensome, and offered to provide summarized financial information instead. But here's what Vivian didn't know about dealing with military logistics coordinators. We don't accept summarized information when we're entitled to detailed records. I responded through my own attorney, citing specific statutes and threatening legal action if the records weren't provided within Colorado's mandatory 30-day timeframe. Meanwhile, Delilah was conducting her own investigation. "Marcus," she said one evening, looking up from her laptop. I ran that security company's name through some databases. Mile High Security Services has some interesting connections. What kind of connections? The kind that make me wonder if your HOA president is running more than just neighborhood compliance scams. She turned her laptop screen toward me. 3 complaints filed with the Better Business Bureau for intimidation tactics and impersonating government officials. That's when the pieces started connecting. Vivian wasn't just embezzling HOA funds through fake vendor contracts. She was using those funds to hire questionable security services that operated in legal gray areas. The HOA records arrived on a Thursday, delivered by a paralegal who seemed eager to drop the box and leave. Inside were 3 years of financial documents that told a fascinating story. Millbrook Property Management Solutions didn't exist because it was just a shell name. The actual payments, $23,000 over 24 months, had gone to Mile High Security Services. But here's the interesting part. The invoices were for property compliance consulting, while the actual services described in their incident reports were enforcement actions and intimidation protocols. In military terms, Vivian had been cooking the books. She'd convinced the HOA board to approve payments for legitimate-sounding property management services, then used that authorization to hire muscle for personal vendettas. My calculator clicked steadily as I added up the discrepancies. $23,000 in unauthorized security services, another $8,000 for emergency landscaping that had never happened. Vivian Blackwood had been systematically stealing from her neighbors for over 2 years, but the real revelation came in a folder marked Board Executive Sessions. Meeting minutes showed Vivian had been voting on her own vendor contracts without disclosing her financial relationships. Under Colorado law, that's not just embezzlement, it's breach of fiduciary duty, which carries personal liability for board members. I photocopied everything, organized it into chronological files, and prepared a detailed analysis. Then I did something Vivian probably didn't expect. I started sharing my findings with other homeowners, not gossiping or spreading rumors. Professional presentations with documented evidence. I knocked on doors, explained the financial irregularities, and showed neighbors exactly how their HOA fees had been misused. The response was immediate and angry. Within a week, I had a dozen neighbors asking questions about their own violation notices and wondering if they'd been targeted unfairly. Vivian's next move was predictable. She called an emergency neighborhood watch meeting to discuss security concerns from non-compliant properties. Time to see how far she was willing to dig her own grave. Vivian scheduled her neighborhood watch meeting for the following Thursday, 7 p.m. at the community center. The flyers she distributed painted a picture of rising crime and security concerns linked to properties that didn't maintain community standards. Reading between the lines wasn't difficult. This was character assassination disguised as public safety. She's trying to turn the neighborhood against you, Delilah observed, reading Vivian's propaganda over breakfast. Classic intimidation tactic. Isolate the target, make them look like the problem. Then we give her exactly what she's asking for, I said. A public forum. I spent Tuesday preparing my presentation. Not accusations or conspiracy theories, just documented facts organized into a clear narrative. HOA financial records, vendor contracts, payment authorizations, and a timeline showing how Vivian had systematically misused her authority. Wednesday evening, I visited 5 neighbors who'd received their own questionable violation notices. The Garcias, who'd been cited for non-conforming landscaping despite their immaculate front yard. Mrs. Patterson, who'd been threatened with fines for her bird feeder allegedly attracting nuisance wildlife. The Johnsons, still fighting their flag violation. Each conversation revealed the same pattern: selective enforcement targeting military families, recent arrivals, and anyone who questioned Vivian's authority. Thursday arrived with that heavy, tension-thick air you feel before a thunderstorm. The squeak of folding chairs being arranged filled the community center as residents filed in. Vivian positioned herself at the front, looking every inch the concerned community leader in her navy blazer and pearl necklace. "Thank you all for coming," she began, scanning the room with practiced confidence. "We're here to discuss some serious security concerns that have been brought to my attention." For 15 minutes, Vivian painted a picture of declining property values and increasing crime. She mentioned aggressive confrontations and anti-community behavior without naming names, but her occasional glances in my direction made her target clear. Then she made her mistake. "Some residents seem more interested in making accusations than maintaining community standards," Vivian said, her voice taking on an edge. "These frivolous records requests and attempts to undermine HOA authority are creating an atmosphere of hostility." That's when I stood up. "Vivian," I said, keeping my voice calm and professional, "since you've brought up records requests, maybe we should discuss what those records actually showed." The nervous throat clearing around the room was audible. Vivian's confident smile flickered. "This isn't the appropriate forum for transparency?" I opened my folder and pulled out the first document. "According to HOA financial records, you've authorized $23,000 in payments to Mile High Security Services over the past 2 years. Services billed as property management consulting, but actually described in their own reports as enforcement actions." The room went dead silent. Vivian's face had lost its color, but she managed to maintain her composure. "Those are routine compliance services authorized by the board." "Routine compliance services," I repeated. "Is that what you call hiring security contractors to intimidate neighbors? Because I've got copies of their incident reports right here." I held up the documents, not reading from them, but making their existence clear. 3 complaints filed with the Better Business Bureau for intimidation tactics. Payment authorizations signed by you for services that exceed your authority under HOA covenants, and vendor contracts with companies that you failed to disclose your financial relationships with. The murmur of voices rose around the room, neighbors turning to each other, asking questions, demanding answers. Vivian finally lost her practiced composure. "This is exactly the kind of disruptive behavior I've been talking about," she snapped. "Mr. Dakota seems more interested in attacking community leadership than following basic property maintenance standards." That's when Roland Blackwood, Vivian's own husband, stood up from the back row. "Vivian," he said, his voice carrying across the room, "we've talked about this. The legal liability alone—" "Not now, Roland!" But Roland wasn't backing down. "Actually, yes now. People have a right to know if their HOA fees are being misused." He looked around the room apologetically. "I've been telling her for months to step down before this becomes a bigger legal problem." The revelation that Vivian's own husband was questioning her actions created a wave of shocked whispers. Neighbors who'd been intimidated into silence suddenly found their voices. "She cited us for our flag," called out Mr. Johnson. "Threatened a lien over our garden fence," added Mrs. Garcia. $23,000 of our money for what exactly?" demanded another voice. Vivian looked around the room, seeing her carefully constructed authority crumbling in real time. Her plastic smile had completely disappeared, replaced by something closer to panic. "This meeting is over," she announced, grabbing her papers. "Immediate enforcement action will be taken against all non-compliant properties." She stormed toward the exit, but 3 neighbors stepped forward to block her path, not physically, just positioned where she couldn't ignore them. "Mrs. Blackwood," said Mrs. Patterson, finding a strength in her voice I'd never heard before, "we demand a special board election. Tonight's revelations require immediate action." Vivian pushed past them and fled to her BMW, leaving behind a room full of neighbors who were finally asking the right questions. But her parting threat about immediate enforcement action told me she wasn't done. If anything, she was about to get desperate. Friday morning brought unexpected news that changed everything. Delilah came home from work with an expression I'd learned to recognize over our 15 years of marriage, the look she got when a case took an interesting turn. "Marcus," she said, settling down at our kitchen table with her laptop, "I ran a background check on your HOA president. You're not going to believe what I found." She turned the screen toward me, showing an FBI database search result. Vivian Blackwood has an outstanding federal warrant for tax evasion from her previous state. Colorado authorities never transferred the warrant when she moved here 3 years ago. I stared at the screen, reading the details. Tax evasion, failure to report income, fraudulent business deductions, charges filed in Arizona in 2018, warrant issued in 2019 but never executed because Vivian had disappeared. "She's been running," I said, "for 6 years. And here's the interesting part. As a U.S. Marshal, I could technically arrest her right now. Interstate compact agreements allow federal marshals to execute state warrants in any jurisdiction." The pieces suddenly clicked together in my head. That's why she moved here. That's why she took over the HOA. She needed to look legitimate, community-rooted, respectable. Exactly. But there's more. Delilah pulled up another document. Her tax evasion case involved hiding income from a property management business. Sound familiar? The parallels were striking. In Arizona, Vivian had been skimming money from multiple HOA accounts through fake vendor contracts and inflated service charges. The same playbook she was running here in Colorado, just on a smaller scale. She's been using the HOA position to appear settled and legitimate, while running the same scams that got her in trouble before, Delilah continued. But now she's trapped. Can't move again without raising suspicion, can't stop the scams because she needs the money, can't afford to let anyone look too closely at her activities. That explained Vivian's escalating desperation. My records requests weren't just threatening her local authority. They were risking exposure of a federal fugitive who'd been successfully hiding for years. "So what's our move?" I asked. Delilah closed her laptop and looked at me with that strategic mindset that made her so effective at tracking fugitives. We let her dig herself deeper. Right now, she's probably panicking about last night's meeting. Desperate people make stupid mistakes. "You mean we don't arrest her?" "Not yet. If I arrest her now, it looks like retaliation for the HOA dispute. But if she escalates her harassment campaign while I document everything," Delilah smiled, "then we have a federal fugitive who's been using fraudulent authority to intimidate citizens. That's a much stronger case." The legal complexity was fascinating. Outstanding warrants don't expire and they can be executed years later in any jurisdiction. But the timing of an arrest can significantly impact how charges are perceived and prosecuted. "Besides," Delilah added, "I want to see how far she's willing to go. If she's hired questionable security services before, what's she going to do when she feels cornered?" Over the weekend, I shared Delilah's strategy, without revealing the warrant details, obviously. We agreed to let Vivian make the next move while we documented everything meticulously. Monday brought our answer. A certified letter arrived announcing immediate compliance enforcement actions for all properties with outstanding violations. But this wasn't coming from the HOA board. It was signed by Vivian personally, threatening legal and regulatory consequences for non-compliance. She was no longer even pretending to follow proper procedures, which meant her desperation was about to lead to much bigger mistakes. The question was, how big a mistake was she willing to make before she realized exactly who she was threatening? That weekend, Delilah and I transformed our garage into a war room. Maps of the neighborhood spread across my workbench, HOA documents organized in neat stacks, and my laptop open to Colorado's surveillance laws. "If Vivian's going to escalate, we need everything documented," Delilah said, reviewing the legal requirements for recording in Colorado. Two-party consent for private conversations, but single-party consent for recording on your own property with proper signage. The sound of my electric drill filled the garage as I began installing discrete security cameras around our property. Nothing hidden or sneaky. Colorado law requires visible notice that recording is taking place. But I built custom housings that blended with our landscape lighting, making the cameras obvious to anyone looking but not obtrusive to casual observers. The smell of wood stain and the texture of camera mounting brackets became familiar over those 2 days. Each installation required careful positioning to capture clear audio and video of anyone approaching our front door, side gates, or backyard. The key is making sure any enforcement action she takes is clearly documented, I explained to Delilah as I adjusted the final camera angle. Audio, video, timestamps, and multiple angles. While I handled the technical setup, Delilah researched warrant execution procedures. If this escalates to the point where I need to act on that warrant, everything has to be by the book, she said, showing me the federal guidelines. Probable cause, proper identification, witness documentation. But our planning went beyond just recording equipment. I'd learned something important from 24 years in military logistics. Success comes from having allies in the right places at the right time. Tuesday evening, we hosted what I called a garden club meeting in our backyard. Mrs. Patterson, the Johnsons, the Garcias, and 3 other neighbors who'd been targeted by Vivian's selective enforcement. Here's what we know, I said, spreading out the financial documents on our patio table. $23,000 in unauthorized payments to security contractors, $8,000 in phantom landscaping services, and systematic targeting of military families and recent arrivals. I explained how HOA complaints work at the state level. Under Colorado Revised Statute 38 to 33.3209.5, homeowners can file complaints with the State Regulatory Board for financial mismanagement and selective enforcement. But individual complaints carry less weight than coordinated documentation from multiple residents. Think of it like a class action approach, I said. Multiple witnesses, consistent pattern of behavior, documented evidence of financial irregularities. Mrs. Garcia raised her hand. What about retaliation? If we all file complaints, won't she just escalate the harassment? That's where Delilah's federal expertise became invaluable. Actually, retaliation against complainants in HOA disputes is a separate violation under state law. If she escalates harassment after official complaints are filed, it strengthens your case significantly. We spent the next hour organizing our evidence chronologically: violation notices, board meeting minutes, financial records, and witness statements from each targeted family. By the end of the evening, we had a comprehensive documentation package ready for submission to state authorities. But I also made sure everyone understood the tactical situation. Vivian's going to escalate before she backs down, I warned them. She's invested too much authority in this position to give up easily, so we need to be prepared for whatever comes next. Wednesday, I made 2 important phone calls. First, to the Denver Metro Task Force that coordinates with federal marshals on warrant executions. I didn't mention specifics, just confirmed the procedures for backup support if needed. Second, to a local news contact I'd met during my Army public affairs work. Not to tip them off about an impending story, but to establish the relationship in case newsworthy events developed. The media angle is crucial, Delilah explained that evening. If this goes public, we want to control the narrative with facts rather than letting Vivian spin it as neighborhood drama. Thursday brought our first test of the new security system. A unmarked sedan circled our block 3 times between 2 and 3 p.m., slowing down in front of our house each time. The cameras captured clear images of the driver, a man in his 30s wearing the same polo shirt style as Dave Morrison from Millbrook Property Management Solutions. Reconnaissance, Delilah observed, reviewing the footage. They're planning something that requires advanced intelligence about your daily routine. I printed out the best images and added them to our evidence file. Then I called Mrs. Patterson to give her a heads up about increased surveillance activity in the neighborhood. Whatever they're planning, I told Delilah that night, it's coming soon. She nodded, checking her service weapon and badge. Then we'll be ready. The security cameras hummed quietly in the darkness outside, recording everything, waiting for Vivian's next mistake. Friday morning brought Vivian's most brazen escalation yet. I was enjoying my coffee on the back deck when a man in an orange safety vest and hard hat appeared at my side gate, carrying an official-looking clipboard and measuring tape. "City building inspector," he announced. "I'm here about your fence height violations." The metallic ping of his measuring tape echoed across the yard as he began checking my fence. But something felt off. Real city inspectors don't show up without advance notice or written complaints. They certainly don't start measuring without introducing themselves properly or explaining the specific violation. "Let me see your credentials," I said, setting down my coffee. "I don't need to show you anything, sir. This is official city business." That's when I knew we were dealing with another fake. I pulled out my phone and called the actual city planning office while he continued his theatrical measuring. "Hi, this is Marcus Dakota on Millbrook Drive. I've got a city inspector here checking fence violations. Can you confirm you sent someone to my address this morning?" The pause on the other end told me everything. "Sir, we don't have any inspectors in your area today, and we don't conduct fence inspections without written complaints and advance notification." "Interesting," I said, loud enough for the fake inspector to hear. "Because I've got someone here claiming to be from your office." The man's measuring tape stopped clicking. His confident demeanor cracked just like Dave Morrison's had. Sir, I'm going to need to see your city employee identification, business cards, and the written complaint that authorized this inspection, I continued. He started backing toward the gate. I'll need to return with additional documentation. Actually, you'll need to explain why you're impersonating a government official. That's a federal crime under 18 U.S.C. Section 912. The crunch of gravel under his boots sounded like panic as he hurried to his truck. I followed at a distance, making sure my security cameras captured his license plate and clear images of his face. Within minutes, he was gone, but not before my cameras recorded the entire encounter, including his refusal to show credentials and his admission that he'd need to return with additional documentation, essentially confessing that he didn't have proper authorization. I called Delilah immediately. Fake government inspector this time. Same pattern as before, but escalated to impersonating city officials. That's federal territory, she said. Impersonating municipal employees falls under the same statutes as impersonating federal officers. Are you sure you got good footage? Crystal clear, audio and video from 3 angles. That afternoon, I received angry phone calls from 2 of my garden club neighbors. The Johnsons got a visit from a county health inspector concerned about their unsanitary composting practices. They don't compost. Mrs. Garcia was visited by someone claiming to be from code enforcement about her illegal storage shed, a standard garden shed that's been properly permitted for 5 years. The pattern was clear. Vivian was systematically targeting everyone who'd attended our meeting, using fake officials to intimidate and harass. But she'd made a crucial tactical error. Instead of focusing her harassment on just me, she'd expanded to multiple witnesses who could now testify to a coordinated campaign of official impersonation. I spent Friday evening organizing all our evidence into a comprehensive package. The fake property manager, the fake city inspector, witness statements from neighbors who'd been visited by fake officials, and documentation showing the pattern of targeting people who'd questioned Vivian's authority. Sunday brought an interesting development. Mrs. Patterson knocked on my door with another manila envelope. I thought you should see this, she said, looking around nervously. Roland dropped it off this morning. He says Vivian doesn't know he's sharing information. Inside was a copy of an email exchange between Vivian and Mile High Security Services. The subject line read, "Enhanced Property Compliance Services, Urgent." Vivian's email was revealing, previous approaches have been insufficient, need more authoritative presence to resolve ongoing compliance issues. Budget approved for escalated enforcement protocols. Mile High's response was even more interesting. Understood. Our enhanced services include uniformed presence with official documentation. Additional liability coverage required for government consultation services. Government consultation services, I read aloud to Delilah. They're not even trying to hide what they're doing. She's paying a security company to have their people impersonate government officials, Delilah observed. That's conspiracy to commit federal crimes, multiple counts. Roland's accompanying note was brief but significant. She won't listen to reason. This has to stop before someone gets hurt or we all end up in legal trouble. Even Vivian's own husband was trying to sabotage her escalating campaign. But the most telling part of Mile High's email was the final paragraph. Team deployment scheduled for Monday. Full authority presentation as discussed. Payment required in advance. Monday. Tomorrow. Vivian was planning something bigger than fake inspectors. Time to see exactly how far she was willing to go. Monday morning started with an unexpected phone call at 7:30 a.m. Unknown number, professional-sounding woman. Mr. Dakota, this is Sarah Mitchell from Millbrook Legal Services. We're calling regarding your HOA compliance issues. We'd like to offer an amicable resolution. I motioned for Delilah to listen in as I put the call on speaker. What kind of resolution? Mrs. Blackwood has authorized us to offer a voluntary relocation package. $5,000 to cover moving expenses, plus assistance finding comparable housing outside the Millbrook Estates area. The nervous sweat smell of desperation practically came through the phone line. You're offering me $5,000 to leave my own home? It's a generous offer considering the ongoing legal complications you're facing. Multiple violation notices, potential lien actions, and the escalating dispute with community leadership. Delilah made notes while I kept Sarah talking. What legal complications? I've followed all proper dispute procedures under state law. Mr. Dakota, between you and me, continuing to fight this will be expensive and stressful for everyone involved. Sometimes it's better to find a fresh start somewhere that's a better fit. There it was. Vivian was so desperate to get rid of me that she was offering bribery disguised as conflict resolution. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I'm not interested in relocating. This is my home. I understand. but please consider that Mrs. Blackwood has significant resources and local connections. Avoiding further legal complications might be in your best interest." After Sarah hung up, Delilah shook her head. "That sounded like an extortion attempt. Pay you to leave or face escalated harassment." "She's running scared," I agreed. "Question is, what's she planning that made her think a bribery attempt was necessary?" We got our answer at 2:15 p.m. I was working in the garage when the rumble of approaching vehicles caught my attention. Through the window, I saw an unmarked dark sedan followed by a white panel van pulling up to my driveway. 3 large men got out wearing black tactical-style uniforms with silver badges and patches reading Enforcement Division. The metallic jingle of their badges mixed with the sound of heavy boots on concrete as they approached my front door. I activated my phone's camera and called Delilah while watching through the security monitors. 3 men in tactical uniforms at the front door, I reported quietly. "Badges look official, but wrong somehow. They're not police." "Stay inside, document everything, and do not let them in without proper warrants," Delilah said. "I'm 10 minutes away." The pounding on my door was aggressive, authoritative. "Police, open up. We have a warrant to inspect this property." I stayed in the garage, watching through my security system as they waved what looked like official documents. Their uniforms were impressive, professional-looking tactical gear, utility belts, even handcuffs. But their badges were wrong, too shiny, wrong shape, and the text was generic enforcement rather than any actual police department. "Sir, we know you're home," one of them shouted. "Failure to cooperate with a legal inspection warrant is obstruction of justice." The beauty of fake authority is that it only works if people don't question it. But I'd spent enough time around real law enforcement to spot the problems. Real police announce their specific department. Real warrants include case numbers and specific allegations. Real officers don't threaten obstruction of justice for inspection warrants. My security cameras captured everything. Their unmarked vehicles, their generic badges, their aggressive demands for entry without showing proper identification. At 2:22 p.m., I heard the best sound possible, the rumble of Delilah's federal vehicle pulling into our driveway. Through the security monitor, I watched my wife step out of her car. Full U.S. Marshal tactical gear, federal badge clearly visible, service weapon properly secured. The contrast was immediate and obvious, real authority versus theatrical authority. The 3 fake cops saw her approaching and their aggressive demands stopped mid-sentence. "Gentlemen," I heard Delilah's calm, professional voice through the monitor. "I'm U.S. Marshal Dakota. Can I see some identification?" "We're conducting an official property inspection," the leader said, but his confidence was already cracking. "I understand. Which department are you with? What's your badge number? Can I see the inspection warrant?" The nervous shuffling was audible. "We're with, Local Enforcement Services." "Local Enforcement Services," Delilah repeated slowly. "That's not a police department. Are you private security?" That's when I stepped out of the garage, still recording. "They claim to be police officers with a warrant. They've been demanding entry for 10 minutes. Delilah's expression hardened. "Gentlemen, impersonating police officers is a felony in Colorado. I'm going to need you to remain where you are while we sort this out." The 3 men looked at each other, then at their fake badges, then at Delilah's very real federal authority. Time for the mic drop moment I'd been waiting 3 months to see. What happened next was better than anything I could have planned. Just as Delilah was explaining federal jurisdiction to 3 increasingly nervous fake cops, Mrs. Patterson's garden club meeting was ending next door. 8 neighbors walked out onto her front lawn just as the confrontation reached its peak. "Gentlemen, you're impersonating federal officers," Delilah announced in her clear, authoritative voice that carried across the street. "I'm placing you under arrest." The flashing emergency lights from Delilah's federal vehicle bathed the entire scene as she called for backup support. Within minutes, we had 3 real patrol cars, a federal supervisor, and a growing crowd of neighbors with smartphones recording everything. But the best part was yet to come. At exactly 3:15 p.m., Vivian's white BMW pulled up behind the patrol cars. She stepped out wearing her best authoritative expression, clearly expecting to supervise her hired muscle in action. Instead, she found her enforcement team sitting in the back of a federal vehicle in handcuffs. "What's the meaning of this?" she demanded, approaching Delilah with the same commanding presence she'd used to intimidate neighbors for years. Delilah looked up from her paperwork with professional calm. "Are you Mrs. Vivian Blackwood?" "I'm the president of this HOA, and those men were conducting authorized compliance inspections." "Actually, Mrs. Blackwood, those men were impersonating police officers. That's a federal crime." Delilah's voice carried that tone I'd learned to recognize, the moment when a fugitive realizes their game is over. I hired them for legitimate security services, Vivian protested, but her confident facade was cracking. That's when Delilah delivered the line I'd been waiting to hear for months. Mrs. Vivian Blackwood, you're under arrest on an outstanding warrant for federal tax evasion issued by the state of Arizona. You have the right to remain silent. The crowd of neighbors stood frozen, smartphones still recording, as the woman who'd terrorized their neighborhood for years was handcuffed by a federal marshal. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed across the street, followed by the sound of neighbors murmuring in shock and satisfaction. But we weren't done yet. A white news van pulled up just as Delilah was placing Vivian in the federal vehicle. Channel 9's investigative reporter, someone I'd contacted earlier in the week, stepped out with her camera crew ready to roll. This is Sarah Kim, reporting live from Millbrook Estates, where a homeowners association president has been arrested on federal charges, she announced to her camera. We're here with homeowner Marcus Dakota, who discovered evidence of HOA financial mismanagement that led to today's arrests. Standing on my own front lawn, surrounded by neighbors who'd been intimidated into silence for years, I explained the investigation simply and clearly. We found evidence that Mrs. Blackwood had been using HOA funds to hire security contractors who impersonated government officials to harass homeowners, I said. Today, 3 men claiming to be police officers demanded entry to my home with fake badges and fraudulent warrants. The reporter turned to Delilah, who was finishing her paperwork. Marshal Dakota, can you explain the federal charges? Mrs. Blackwood has been a federal fugitive for 6 years on tax evasion charges from Arizona, Delilah said professionally. Today's arrests for impersonating federal officers are separate charges that will be prosecuted in Colorado. Mrs. Patterson stepped forward, finding her voice for the cameras. She's been targeting military families and anyone who questioned her authority. We're just glad someone finally stood up to her. The visual impact was perfect. 3 fake cops in handcuffs, a federal fugitive being arrested by a real U.S. Marshal, and a neighborhood of witnesses finally free to tell their stories without fear of retaliation. Roland Blackwood appeared at the edge of the crowd, looking relieved rather than surprised. When the reporter approached him, he simply said, "I tried to warn her this would happen. She wouldn't listen." As the news crew finished their interviews and the patrol cars departed, an interesting thing happened. Neighbors who'd been afraid to speak up for months started sharing their own stories. The Garcias talked about selective enforcement. Mrs. Patterson described intimidation tactics. The Johnsons explained the flag violation absurdity. What started as individual harassment had become community solidarity. "You know what the best part is?" Delilah said as we watched the last patrol car disappear down our street. "All those fake inspections she sent to your neighbors? Every single one documented her conspiracy to impersonate government officials. She built the case against herself." Standing in our driveway, surrounded by neighbors who were finally free to enjoy their own properties without fear, I realized we'd accomplished something bigger than just stopping one corrupt HOA president. We'd proven that bullies with fake authority can't stand up to real accountability. 6 months later, Millbrook Estates had transformed into the kind of neighborhood we'd all hoped for when we moved here. Vivian's legal aftermath was swift and comprehensive. The fake security team received federal sentences ranging from 18 to 36 months for impersonating government officials. Vivian herself was extradited to Arizona on the original tax evasion charges, then brought back to Colorado to face conspiracy charges for the HOA embezzlement scheme. Her total sentence: 8 years federal prison with restitution requirements. Roland Blackwood cooperated fully with investigators, helping recover $31,000 in embezzled HOA funds through asset forfeiture. The recovered money was returned to our community association account, providing resources we'd never had before. The emergency HOA election held 2 weeks after Vivian's arrest brought real change. Mrs. Patterson was elected president, with the Garcia family and Mr. Johnson joining the board. Their first official act was rescinding every violation notice issued during Vivian's tenure and establishing transparent financial oversight procedures. "No more secret vendor contracts," Mrs. Patterson announced at our first post-Vivian board meeting. "Every expenditure over $200 requires full board approval and homeowner notification." The new board also established what we called the Veterans Assistance Fund, using a portion of the recovered embezzlement money to help military families with property maintenance and emergency repairs. Within 3 months, we'd helped 4 families with everything from roof repairs to wheelchair accessibility modifications. But the real transformation was harder to quantify. The smell of fear that had hung over our neighborhood for years was replaced by something warmer, the scent of barbecues where neighbors actually wanted to spend time together, the sound of children playing in yards without parents worrying about violation notices, the sight of American flags flying proudly without threats of fines. Property values increased 12% over 6 months, according to Roland's County Assessor data. Real estate agents started marketing Millbrook Estates as a veteran-friendly community with transparent governance. My own legal education had unexpected benefits. 3 other HOA disputes in surrounding neighborhoods asked for my help documenting financial irregularities and selective enforcement patterns. I became an informal consultant on homeowner rights, helping families understand Colorado's HOA disclosure laws and complaint procedures. Delilah's federal case became a training example for other marshals dealing with fugitives who'd integrated into community leadership roles. Sometimes the best hiding place is a position of local authority, she explained to new marshal trainees. But authority without legitimacy always collapses under scrutiny. The security cameras I'd installed remained active, but now they primarily recorded neighborhood kids riding bikes and friendly conversations over garden fences. The evidence files from Vivian's harassment campaign were stored securely, available if needed for ongoing legal proceedings. Last month, our new HOA board organized the first annual Millbrook Community Festival, featuring local food trucks, a Veterans Appreciation Ceremony, and booths from neighborhood small businesses. The funds raised went directly to playground improvements and a scholarship fund for military children attending college. Standing at that festival, watching families enjoy themselves without fear of arbitrary authority, I reflected on what we'd really accomplished. We hadn't just stopped one corrupt official. We'd proven that communities can reclaim their power from bullies and create something better. The best moment came when Mrs. Garcia approached me at the festival. "Marcus," she said, "my daughter asked me why our neighbors seem so much happier now. I told her that sometimes good people have to stand up to bad people to protect everyone else." That's exactly what I'd wanted to hear. But this story isn't over. Next month, I'm helping a disabled veteran in the next subdivision fight predatory contractors who've been targeting military families with overpriced home repairs and fake emergency services. Same playbook, different scam, but now we know how to fight back. So here's my message to anyone dealing with corrupt authority. Document everything, build alliances, and remember that bullies depend on good people staying silent. Drop your worst HOA nightmare in the comments. You might be featured in a future video. And if you want to hear more stories about regular people beating corrupt systems, make sure to subscribe, because the best defense against fake authority is real community.
Thanks for hanging out with us on HOA Stories, where the HOA Karens meet their match. If this story had you cheering or cringing, go ahead and like the video, drop a comment with your reaction, and hit subscribe so you're ready for the next wild HOA tale.